I never thought I'd reach 74 and still be waiting for my phone to ring. 7 years. 7 birthdays that came and went like autumn leaves, falling into an empty yard. Each October 15th, I'd wake up with that familiar flutter of hope in my chest, check my phone, and find nothing. Elric used to call every year without fail, sometimes even sending flowers. But somewhere between his second startup and his third promotion, I became background noise in his busy Vancouver life. This morning I'm standing in my kitchen staring at the calendar, where I've marked each forgotten birthday with a red X. 7 red marks that tell a story I'm finally ready to acknowledge. But what happens when a mother decides to stop being a mother? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose every story worth telling begins with the moment you realize your life isn't quite what you thought it was. For me, that moment happened last Tuesday when I found myself talking to Mrs. Henderson's cat through my kitchen window, explaining why I'd bought a birthday cake for one. My name is Imogene Westridge, and I've lived in this weathered blue house on Maple Coast Drive for 38 years. The Atlantic Ocean stretches endlessly beyond my back garden, where I've cultivated roses that somehow thrive despite the salt air. Most mornings I wake to the sound of waves and the cry of seagulls, a symphony that's become as familiar as my own heartbeat. I retired from teaching high school literature 15 years ago, though sometimes I catch myself grading imaginary papers in my head when I read the newspaper. 43 years of shaping young minds, of introducing teenagers to Shakespeare and Dickinson, of staying late to help struggling students understand the beauty in carefully chosen words. The plaque they gave me at retirement sits on my mantel, gathering dust between photographs of Elric at various stages of his life. The house feels larger now than it did when Elric was growing up. Back then, every room buzzed with activity. Homework sprawled across the dining table, soccer cleats abandoned by the front door, the television chattering in the background while he practiced guitar. Now, the silence has weight to it, settling into corners like cobwebs I've grown too tired to sweep away. My daily routine has become a carefully choreographed dance with solitude. I wake at 6:30, brew coffee in the same ceramic mug Elric made me in pottery class when he was 12, and sit at the kitchen table to watch the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of amber and rose. I read 3 chapters of whatever novel has caught my fancy, tend to my garden, and walk the 2 miles into town for groceries, or just to exchange pleasantries with familiar faces. The townspeople know me as the retired teacher, who always has a kind word and remembers everyone's children by name. They don't know about the phone calls I don't receive, or the birthday cards I don't send anymore. They see the woman who volunteers at the library book sale every summer and brings homemade cookies to church functions. They don't see the woman who sets the table for 2 out of habit, then quietly puts away the extra plate. Elric was 9 when his father died in that car accident on Highway 103. I remember the phone call, the way my knees buckled, the sound of the casserole dish shattering on the kitchen floor. In that moment, my world narrowed to a single focus, raising my son to be the man his father would have been proud of. I worked extra hours tutoring students, saved every penny for his education, and somehow managed to send him to university without debt. He was brilliant, my Elric. Still is, I suppose, though brilliance means little when it's focused everywhere, except on the people who love you. He studied computer science, moved to Vancouver for an internship that turned into a career, and built a life I see only through carefully curated social media posts. Photos of him at industry conferences, celebrating funding rounds for his startup, always surrounded by young, energetic faces that reflect his ambition back at him. I used to visit twice a year, flying across the country with gifts and home-baked goods, staying in the guest room of his downtown condo. But the visits grew shorter, more strained. He'd work late, schedule meetings during my stay, check his phone constantly during our dinners together. I began to feel like an obligation and he was checking off his list, rather than a person he genuinely wanted to see. The last time I visited was 4 years ago. I'd planned the trip around his birthday in March, thinking we could celebrate together. But he forgot about dinner reservations I'd made weeks in advance, instead attending an urgent client meeting that lasted until nearly midnight. I spent the evening alone in his apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the city lights twinkle beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. When I flew home, I made a decision that felt both liberating and devastating. I would stop being the one who always reached out first. I would wait for him to call, to visit, to remember the woman who had shaped his entire world during those crucial first 18 years. The waiting taught me things about myself I hadn't expected to learn at this stage of life. I discovered I'd become so accustomed to pouring my love into someone else that I'd forgotten how to direct it toward myself. I realized that the ache of missing someone can become as familiar as breathing, and just as unconscious. My best friend, Adele, often stops by in the evenings, bringing wine and opinions in equal measure. She's the only person who knows the full extent of my disappointment with Elric, though she knew it before I was ready to admit it myself. Adele has a way of seeing through the polite facades we construct to protect ourselves from uncomfortable truths. "You raised him too well," she told me once, settling into the worn leather chair that had been my husband's favorite. "Made it too easy for him to take your love for granted." But even Adele doesn't know about the calendar in my kitchen, about the red X's that mark not just forgotten birthdays, but the gradual erosion of a relationship I'd thought was unbreakable. She doesn't know that I've started writing letters to Elric that I never send, pouring my feelings onto paper because speaking them aloud would make them too real. The ocean outside my window changes with the seasons, sometimes angry and gray, sometimes calm and blue as a summer sky. But it's always there, always moving, always finding new ways to shape the coastline. I've begun to think of myself like that coastline, changed by forces beyond my control, but still standing, still beautiful, in my own weathered way. Tonight, as I prepare for bed, I realize that tomorrow will mark 1 week since my 74th birthday came and went unnoticed by the one person whose acknowledgement I'd hoped for most. 7 days of telling myself it doesn't matter, of making excuses for why a successful businessman might forget such a simple thing. But standing here in my quiet house, with only the sound of waves for company, I understand that it does matter. It matters more than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. The phone call that changed everything came at 3:17 on a Thursday afternoon in November. I know the exact time because I was watching the kitchen clock, timing my shortbread cookies, when the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Westridge?" The voice was young, professional, slightly nervous. "This is Jennifer Chen from Elric's office. I'm his assistant." My heart stopped. In 45 years of being Elric's mother, no one from his work had ever called me directly. The possibilities crashed through my mind like breaking waves. Accident, illness, something terrible enough to require notification of next of kin. "Is he all right?" The words tumbled out before I could catch them. "Oh yes, he's fine," Jennifer rushed to reassure me. "I'm calling because, well, this is a bit awkward, but Elric asked me to handle some personal matters for him. He wanted me to send you a birthday gift and card. For your birthday, last month. The timer for my cookies went off. A shrill beeping that seemed to echo in the sudden hollow space where my stomach used to be. I turned off the oven without removing the tray, watching steam rise from golden edges while Jennifer's words settled into understanding. He asked you to send me a birthday gift? Yes, ma'am. He said he'd been incredibly busy with the new product launch and felt terrible about missing it. He wanted me to find something nice and send it with his apologies. I was quiet for so long that Jennifer must have wondered if I'd hung up. The truth was, I couldn't speak. I was staring at the calendar on my wall, at those 7 red X's, realizing that this year, year 8, wouldn't even get an X. It would get a gift selected by a stranger, sent by someone who probably didn't even know my middle name or how I liked my coffee. Mrs. Westridge, are you still there? Yes. My voice sounded strange, distant even to my own ears. That's very thoughtful of you, Jennifer. But please don't send anything. Oh, but he insisted. Tell him thank you. But it's not necessary. I was surprised by how steady I sounded. Tell him I said thank you, but it's not necessary. I hung up before she could argue, before I could hear whatever script Elric had given her about his regret and good intentions. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer, as I understood with crystalline clarity that my son had outsourced even his guilt to an employee. The shortbread cookies were burned around the edges but salvageable. I removed them from the oven and set them on the counter to cool, moving through the familiar motions while my mind reeled. How long had he been having Jennifer handle personal matters? Was she the one who sent the generic Christmas cards? The flowers for Mother's Day that arrived with messages so impersonal they could have been addressed to anyone. I walked to my writing desk in the living room and pulled out the stack of unsent letters I'd written to Elric over the past year. Pages and pages of carefully crafted words, explaining my feelings, expressing my love, trying to bridge the distance between us. Letters I'd written and rewritten, polished and perfected, then filed away because sending them felt too desperate, too needy. The top letter was dated 3 weeks ago, written after another sleepless night spent wondering if I'd somehow failed as a mother. I read my own words back to myself. My dear Elric, I hope this letter finds you well and thriving in the life you've built. I often think about you, wondering what fills your days, who makes you laugh, what challenges excite you. I know you're busy, and I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. But sometimes I can't help feeling like I'm watching your life through a window, seeing only what you choose to show the world. The letter went on for 3 pages, a careful balance of love and longing, pride and pain. I'd spent hours choosing, each word, trying to sound supportive rather than accusatory, understanding rather than hurt. Reading it now, I saw it for what it really was. A woman begging for scraps of attention from someone who had hired a stranger to manage his relationship with her. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the stack. Then I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept matches. One by one, I fed my unsent letters to the flames in the sink, watching months of carefully contained emotion turn to ash. The smoke alarm went off briefly, adding its own commentary to my small rebellion. When the last letter had burned, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done since Elric was a teenager. I cried. Not the careful, composed tears I'd allowed myself in private moments, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere I'd forgotten existed. I cried for the mother who had sacrificed everything and asked for so little in return. I cried for the woman who had made herself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into the margins of her son's life. But mostly I cried for the realization that I had been complicit in my own erasure. The crying jag lasted exactly 13 minutes. I know because I was still watching that damned kitchen clock, timing my breakdown the way I'd timed my cookies. When it was over, I felt empty but oddly clear. Like a house after a thorough cleaning, I stood up, wiped my face with a dish towel, and walked to the phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Jennifer Chen's number, which had been automatically saved from her call. Elric Westridge's office, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, this is Imogene Westridge. I wanted to clarify something about our earlier conversation. Of course, Mrs. Westridge. Did you change your mind about the gift? No, but I want you to give Elric a message for me. Can you write this down? Certainly. I took a deep breath, feeling years of careful politeness fall away like an old coat I no longer needed. Tell him his mother called to say that effective immediately, he no longer needs to concern himself with my birthday or any other personal matters involving me. Tell him I release him from any obligation he may feel toward maintaining our relationship. Tell him I wish him well, but I won't be available for further contact. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Mrs. Westridge, are you sure you want me to relay that exact message? Word for word, Jennifer. And please make sure he understands that this isn't a request for attention or an attempt to manipulate him into calling. This is simply information. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the smell of burned letters and slightly scorched shortbread. The afternoon light was fading, painting the room in shades of amber that matched my mood. Not dark, but different than it had been that morning. I thought about the gift Jennifer had offered to send. Probably something generic but expensive, chosen to fulfill an obligation rather than express genuine affection. I thought about my son sitting in his Vancouver office, treating his relationship with his mother like another item on his assistant's to-do list. But mostly, I thought about the woman I used to be, before I became defined entirely by my role as Elric's mother. The woman who had her own dreams, her own interests, her own worth that didn't depend on someone else's validation. That woman had been sleeping for a long time, buried under years of unreciprocated love and diminishing returns. But Jennifer's phone call had been an alarm clock, harsh and unwelcome, but ultimately necessary. For the first time in years, I felt curious about what tomorrow might bring if I stopped waiting for yesterday's promises to be fulfilled. The first week after my decision felt like learning to walk again after a long illness. Every morning, I woke with the habitual urge to check my phone for messages that wouldn't come, to rehearse conversations that would never happen. But instead of the familiar ache of disappointment, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not relief exactly, but a kind of lightness, as if I'd set down a heavy bag I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Adele noticed the change immediately when she stopped by on Saturday with her weekly offering of gossip and wine. You look different, she said, settling into her favorite chair with the practiced ease of 40 years of friendship. Did you finally listen to me about that new moisturizer? I was arranging the last of my garden roses in a vase, these hardy, November blooms that somehow persisted despite the approaching winter. I made a decision about Elric, her wineglass paused halfway to her lips. Adele had been waiting for this conversation for years, though she'd been too wise to push. What kind of decision? I told him he doesn't need to pretend to care about me anymore. I explained about Jennifer's call, about the delegated birthday gift, about the message I'd asked her to relay. Adele listened without interruption, her face cycling through surprise, concern, and something that looked like pride. Well, she said finally, it's about damn time. Is it terrible that I feel lighter? Honey, the only terrible thing is that it took you this long. She sat down, her wine, and leaned forward. You've been performing the role of devoted mother for an audience of one who stopped watching the show years ago. The metaphor stung because it was accurate. I had been performing, hadn't I? Playing the part of the understanding mother, the one who never complained, never demanded, never made her needs inconvenient for anyone else. Even in my unsent letters, I'd been so careful to sound reasonable, to cushion every hurt feeling with reassurance about his busy life. I don't know how to be anything else, I admitted. Then maybe it's time to find out. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I drove to Halifax without telling anyone where I was going. The 90-minute drive gave me time to think, to let the coastal highway unwind my thoughts the way it unwound before me. I hadn't realized how small my world had become, how circumscribed by routine and waiting. In Halifax, I walked through the Maritime Museum, studied artifacts, from lives lived fully and completely. I had lunch at a restaurant I'd never tried, ordered wine in the middle of the day simply because I wanted to. I bought a book of poetry by a Nova Scotian writer I'd never heard of, chose it for the beauty of the cover rather than any scholarly recommendation. The drive home felt different too. Instead of the familiar weight of responsibility that usually settled on my shoulders as I approached my house, I felt anticipation. Not for what might happen, a phone call, a visitor, an external validation, but for what I might discover about myself in the quiet spaces I was learning to inhabit. But change, I learned, is rarely linear. Tuesday brought rain, and the first real test of my resolve. I was organizing my address book, a leather-bound relic from before cell phones made such things obsolete, when I found Elric's information written in 3 different inks. His childhood address in blue ballpoint, his university information in black gel pen, his current Vancouver details in pencil because addresses changed but phone numbers followed him. Without thinking, I reached for a pen to cross out his entry. The motion was automatic, efficient, final. But as the ink began to flow across his name, my hand stopped. This was my son. The baby who had gripped my finger with surprising strength in the hospital. The toddler who insisted on wearing his Superman cape to grocery stores. The teenager who had cried in my arms after his first heartbreak, trusting me with his vulnerability in a way he never would again. I set the pen down and closed the address book. The phone rang that afternoon while I was reading in the living room. The display showed Elric's number, and for a moment, my carefully constructed resolve wavered. 7 rings. That's how long I let it sound before the machine picked up. "Mom, it's me." His voice filled my quiet house, and despite everything, my heart performed its familiar leap of recognition. "Jennifer said you called yesterday. I'm not sure what's going on, but I think there might have been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you call me back? I'm worried about you." The message lasted 43 seconds. I know because I played it back twice, listening for something beneath the words. Genuine concern, real regret, some indication that he understood what had driven me to that phone call. But all I heard was confusion, and the particular kind of worry that comes from having your routine disrupted rather than your heart engaged. I didn't call back. Thursday brought another call, this one shorter. "Mom, please call me." Jennifer told me what she said about the birthday gift, and I can see why that might have been not ideal. "Let's talk about this. Friday." "I don't understand why you're not answering. Did I do something?" "Mom, whatever's wrong, we can fix it." The assumption implicit in that last message, that whatever was wrong could be easily fixed, revealed how little he truly understood about the years of accumulated disappointment that had led to this moment. He was treating it like a technical problem, with a simple solution rather than the natural consequence of his long-term neglect. But the calls were working on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each time his voice filled my house, I felt the old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the maternal instinct to soothe, to explain, to make everything comfortable for him again. I caught myself reaching for the phone more than once, stopped only by the memory of Jennifer's voice, offering to send me a stranger's idea of what would please an elderly mother. Adele found me one evening staring at the answering machine, which now held 6 messages I hadn't returned. "Playing with fire, aren't you?" she observed. I didn't expect him to call at all. I thought he'd be relieved. "Honey, you trained him to expect unconditional forgiveness. Of course he's confused when the rules suddenly change." She was right, but that didn't make it easier. I'd spent decades being the steady, reliable constant in Elric's life, the one person who would always be there, no matter how long the intervals between contact became. I'd been so committed to that role that I'd forgotten I had any choice in the matter. What if I'm wrong? The question escaped before I could stop it. What if I'm just being selfish? Adele's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Imogene, you've been the least selfish person I know for your entire adult life. If selfishness is what it takes to claim a little dignity, then be selfish. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad and began writing again. Not a letter to Elric this time, but a list of things I'd stopped doing, stopped wanting, stopped being because I'd made myself so available to someone who was never available in return. The list grew longer than I'd expected. Books I'd wanted to read, places I'd wanted to visit, friendships I'd let fade because I was always waiting for that call, that visit, that acknowledgement that never came with enough frequency to satisfy the hunger I'd tried so hard to disguise. Looking at that list, I realized that losing Elric's attention hadn't just hurt. It had made me lose sight of myself entirely. I'd become so focused on the relationship I wasn't having that I'd forgotten to have any others. But underneath the hurt, something else was growing. A curiosity about who I might be if I stopped defining myself primarily as someone's disappointed mother. A woman who could drive to Halifax on a whim, who could buy books of poetry just because she liked the cover, who could sit in her own house without waiting for it to feel complete. The answering machine blinked with another unheard message, but for the first time since this all began, I felt no urgency to listen to it. Whatever Elric needed to say could wait until I figured out what I needed to say to myself. December arrived with the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there for the winter. I'd always hated this month. Not for the weather, but for the weight of expectation it carried. Christmas had become a minefield of careful navigation around Elric's schedule, around whether he might visit, around the increasingly hollow exchanges of gifts sent through the mail. This year felt different. Instead of dreading the approaching holiday, I found myself curious about what it might look like without the familiar patterns of hope and disappointment. The answering machine had collected 11 messages before I finally listened to them. Elric's voice evolved over the weeks from confusion to frustration to something that almost sounded like genuine concern. The last message, left on a Wednesday evening, was different from the others. Mom, I've been doing some thinking since Jennifer's call. Maybe I haven't been as present as I should have been. I know I've been busy, but that's not an excuse. I want to make this right. I'm planning to come home for Christmas, if you'll have me. Please call me back. I played it 3 times, listening for the undertone of obligation that had colored our relationship for so long. But this time, I heard something else. A crack in the polished veneer of his professional life. A glimpse of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The maternal part of me wanted to call him immediately, to smooth over the awkwardness and return to our familiar dysfunction. But the woman I was becoming hesitated. Was this genuine change? Or just another version of the same pattern? Elric feeling guilty enough to make a grand gesture that would absolve him of smaller, daily considerations. I decided to wait and see. Meanwhile, my world was quietly expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Naomi Carver, who owned the small cafe on Harbor Street, had been encouraging me to join the Thursday evening writing group that met in her back room. "You were an English teacher," she'd said during one of my increasingly frequent stops for coffee and conversation. "You must have stories to tell." I'd resisted for months, claiming I was too old to start something new. But the week after Elric's last message, I found myself pushing through the cafe's back door into a circle of 6 women, all past 60, all clutching notebooks and looking as nervous as I felt. The group was led by Marion Foster, a retired journalist who'd moved to the coast to write her memoirs. "We're not here to create the next great Canadian novel," she announced. "We're here to bear witness to our own lives." That first evening, we wrote about objects that held memories. I found myself describing the half-finished gray sweater that had been sitting in my knitting basket for 3 years. I'd started it for Elric the Christmas before his calls became sporadic, imagining him wearing it in his Vancouver apartment, carrying a piece of his mother's love against the city's chill. But as I wrote about the sweater, something shifted. I wrote about the woman who had chosen that particular shade of gray because it matched her son's eyes. I wrote about the hours spent knitting in the evenings, each stitch a small prayer for connection. And then I wrote about the evening I'd unraveled it all, reclaiming the wool to make something for myself instead. "That's powerful," Marion said after I'd read aloud, my voice shaking slightly. "The metaphor of unraveling and remaking. That's what we're all doing here, isn't it?" The other women nodded, and I realized I wasn't alone in this business of reinventing myself in the second half of life. There was Patricia, whose husband had died suddenly, after 43 years of marriage. Susan, whose children lived across the country and called dutifully but distantly. Margaret, who'd spent so many years caring for her disabled sister that she'd forgotten what she enjoyed outside of caregiving. We were all learning the same difficult lesson, that love without reciprocity becomes a kind of prison, no matter how beautifully furnished. Walking home that night, I felt lighter than I had in months, not because I'd found easy answers, but because I'd found community among women who understood the particular loneliness of being needed in theory but not in practice. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having my coffee and watching the winter sunrise when I saw a figure walking up my drive. For a wild moment I thought it might be Elric, making good on his Christmas promise early. But as the figure got closer, I recognized Griffin Tallow, the bookstore owner I'd spoken with occasionally but never really known. Griffin was somewhere in his early 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier, and he'd moved to the coast to start over, opening a small bookshop that specialized in maritime literature and local authors. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said when I opened the door. "I was walking on the beach and saw your light. I wanted to return this." He held up a book I'd loaned him weeks earlier, a collection of Elizabeth Bishop's poetry. Not at mind at all. "Would you like some coffee?" We sat in my kitchen, steam rising from our mugs, while the morning light gradually brightened. Griffin had a quiet way of speaking that reminded me of deep water, still on the surface but with hidden currents beneath. "I've been thinking about one of the poems you mocked," he said. "The one about the art of losing." "One art," I said. "Bishop wrote it after her partner left her. The art of losing isn't hard to master," he quoted. "So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster." We sat with that for a moment, each thinking about our own catalogue of losses. Griffin's wife, my relationship with Elric, the versions of ourselves we'd been before life taught us that love doesn't always last just because it's genuine. "Sometimes I think the hardest part isn't learning to lose," I said finally. "It's learning when to stop trying to hold on." He nodded slowly. "My Sarah used to say that some endings are really beginnings in disguise. I never understood what she meant until I found myself alone in that house in Toronto, surrounded by our things, but not our life." We talked for an hour about books and grief and the strange courage it takes to rebuild a life after the foundation shifts. When he left, he paused at the door. "Would you be interested in having dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just company." I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. That afternoon I called Elric back, not because of Griffin's visit, but because I was finally ready to speak from my own clarity rather than my hurt. "Mom." His relief was audible. "I was starting to worry something had happened to you." "I'm fine, Elric. I've been thinking about your message. And? Will you let me come for Christmas?" I took a breath. "You can come if you want to, but not to make things right. There's nothing broken that can be fixed with a single visit." "I don't understand." "I know you don't, and that's part of the problem. You think this is about one forgotten birthday, or one delegated gift. But it's about 7 years of making me feel like an afterthought in your life." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of things finally being said aloud. "Mom, I never meant... I know you didn't mean it. That's almost worse than if you had. It means I became so unimportant that you could hurt me without even noticing." "So, what do you want from me?" The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a simple answer. What I wanted was for him to understand that relationships require intention, that love without attention becomes meaningless over time. But that wasn't something I could demand or explain into existence. "I want you to think about whether you actually want a relationship with me, or if you just want to avoid feeling guilty about not having one." "Of course I want." "Think about it, Elric. Really think. And if you decide you do want to know me, not just fulfill an obligation to me, then we can talk about what that might look like." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and realized something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for him to change or fearing that he wouldn't. I was simply clear about what I would and wouldn't accept, and strangely, that clarity felt like its own kind of freedom. The gray sweater sat finished on my dining room table, made in a style I'd never worn before. A loose, comfortable cardigan, with pockets deep enough for books and shells collected on. Beach walks. It fit perfectly, which seemed like a small miracle in itself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in mid-December, slipped through my mail slot along with the usual collection of bills and advertisements. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting that looked young and slightly uncertain, with my name spelled out fully. Mrs. Imogene Westridge. The return address showed a name I didn't recognize. C. Westridge, with an address in Vancouver. I stood in my hallway holding the envelope, my heart performing complicated gymnastics as possibilities raced through my mind. The handwriting was too deliberate to be Elric's, too formal to be from anyone I knew well. But that last name, Westridge, narrowed the possibilities to something that made my hands shake slightly as I opened it. Dear Grandmother, I hope it's okay that I'm writing. To you. I found your address in some old papers in Dad's desk drawer when I was looking for stamps. My name is Cypress, but everyone calls me Sip. I'm 16, and I'm your grandchild, though I don't think Dad has mentioned me much. The letter fell from my fingers as if it had caught fire. I stared at the cream-colored paper lying on my hardwood floor, the words, your grandchild, seeming to pulse with their own light. A grandchild. Elric had a child, a 16-year-old child I'd never known existed. I sank onto the bench by my front door, my mind struggling to process this information. 16 years. My son had been a parent for 16 years without telling me. I had been a grandmother for 16 years without knowing. With trembling hands, I picked up the letter and continued reading. I know this might be a shock. Dad doesn't really talk about family much, and when I ask about you, he just says you live far away and wouldn't be interested in hearing from us. But I found some letters in that same drawer. Letters you wrote to him that he never answered. And I found photos of you from when he was little. You look kind. I don't know why Dad doesn't want us to know each other. But I wanted you to know I exist. I'm an artist. I paint mostly, but I also do digital design. I'm applying to art schools for next year, and one of them is NSCAD in Halifax. Dad says I can't afford it, but I have good grades, and I'm hoping for scholarships. I found your phone number too, but I wasn't brave enough to call. Dad doesn't know I'm writing this, and I don't think he'd be happy if he found out. But I needed you to know about me, and I needed to know about you. If you want to write back, you can send letters to my friend Mason's house. His address is on the back of this envelope. His parents are divorced too, so he understands about complicated family stuff. I hope you don't mind that I wrote. I've been curious about you my whole life. Love, Cypress P.S. I found a picture of you and Dad when he was about my age. You're wearing a yellow dress and you both look really happy. I painted a version of it from memory after I put the photo back. I thought you might like to know that. I read the letter 3 times before my brain began to process its full implications. A grandchild who painted. A 16-year-old who had been curious about me their whole life, while I'd been completely unaware of their existence. A teenager brave enough to reach out across their father's silence to find the grandmother they'd been denied. But underneath the shock and joy was a deeper, more devastating realization. Elric hadn't just been neglecting our relationship. He'd been actively hiding his family from me. This wasn't about being too busy to call or forgetting birthdays. This was about deliberately erasing me from his child's life. I walked to my phone and dialed Elric's number without thinking. The letter still clutched in my other hand. He answered on the second ring. Mom, I was just thinking about you. I've been looking at flights for Christmas. You have a child. The words came out flat, factual, cutting through his cheerful preamble, like a knife. The silence on the other end was so complete, I could hear the hum of the phone line. Mom, a 16-year-old child named Cypress, who just wrote to tell me they exist. A grandchild I've never known about. How did... He stopped himself, and I could hear him taking a breath, regrouping. Cyp wasn't supposed to... This is complicated, Mom. Complicated? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. You have a child who's been alive for 16 years, and you never told me. Your mother. Your only family. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried a defensive edge I recognized from his teenage years. Sipe's other parent and I. It didn't work out. It was messy. I thought it was better to keep things simple. Simple for whom? I was standing now, pacing the length of my kitchen with the cordless phone. Simple for you, because it certainly wasn't simple for your child, who just had to write to their grandmother in secret to find out they have family. You don't know the whole situation? You're right, I don't, because you've been lying to me for 16 years, not just avoiding me or forgetting to call, actively lying about the most important thing in your life. I didn't lie. Omission is lying, Elric. Every conversation we've had where you didn't mention having a child was a lie. Every birthday card I sent that you didn't reciprocate with news about my grandchild was a lie. I could hear him breathing. On the other end, could almost see him running his hands through his hair the way he used to when he was in trouble as a boy. I was protecting them, he said finally. From what? From having a grandmother who would love them? From disappointment, from getting attached to someone who might not stick around. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. When have I ever not stuck around? When have I ever been anything but there for you? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I meant people leave, okay? People die. Or they move on. Or they decide they don't want the complication. I didn't want Sipe to go through that. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And there it was, the truth underneath all the neglect and distance. Elric wasn't just busy or thoughtless. He was afraid. Afraid of loss. Afraid of vulnerability. Afraid of the kind of love that makes you hostage to another person's choices. So, you decided to guarantee they'd lose me by making sure they never had me in the first place. It seemed safer. I sank back onto the kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. Safer for whom? Because your child just told me they've been curious about me their whole life. They found pictures, Elric. They found my letters that you never answered. They painted a picture of us from memory. They had no right to go through my things. They had every right to know their family, and I have every right to know my grandchild. The silence stretched between us, filled with 16 years of missed birthdays, missed school plays, missed bedtime stories, missed everything. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I want you to stop being afraid of love long enough to let it happen. I want you to tell Cypress they can write to me directly, instead of sneaking around. And I want you to understand that by trying to protect them from potential loss, you guaranteed them actual loss. And if I don't? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked at Cypress's letter still lying on my kitchen table and thought about a teenager brave enough to reach across their father's fears to find connection. Then I'll respect their choice to have a relationship with me anyway. They're 16, Elric. Old enough to decide who they want in their life. I hung, up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and anger and something that felt like awakening. A grandchild. I had a grandchild who painted, who was curious, who had been wondering about me for 16 years while I'd been mourning a relationship with a son who had been keeping the most important part of his life secret from me. I walked to my writing desk and pulled out fresh stationery. This letter I would send. The correspondence with Cypress became the highlight of my winter. Every week brought a new letter to Mason's address, and every week I wrote back, learning about the grandchild I'd been denied for 16 years. Sipe wrote about school and friends, about painting techniques and college dreams, about the small frustrations and large hopes that fill a teenager's world. Through those letters, I glimpsed the person Elric had become as a parent. Distant, but not cruel, providing material support while withholding emotional connection. Sipe wrote carefully around the edges of their relationship with their father, and I learned to read between the lines. "Dad works a lot," one letter said. "He's good at the business stuff, making sure I have what I need for school and art supplies. But he gets uncomfortable when I want to talk about feelings or the future. I think he's afraid I'll disappoint him, or maybe that he'll disappoint me." Another letter revealed more. "I know he loves me, but it's like he loves me from a distance, you know? Like he's afraid if he gets too close, something bad will happen. Maybe something bad did happen when he was young." Reading that, I remembered the 9-year-old boy who had crawled into my bed after nightmares, who had needed constant reassurance that I wouldn't disappear like his father had. I'd thought I'd given him enough security to heal from that early loss, but perhaps some wounds go deeper than a mother's love can reach. Sipe's letters also revealed a remarkable young person, thoughtful, talented, remarkably mature for 16. They sent photos of their artwork, abstract paintings that somehow captured the feeling of ocean storms, digital designs that played with light and shadow in ways that made my breath catch. In February, a larger envelope arrived with Sip's usual letter, but also something unexpected. Photocopied application materials for the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. "I wanted to share this with someone," Sipe wrote. "Dad thinks art school is impractical, especially one so far away. But I've been saving money from part-time jobs, and I think I might have a real chance at scholarships. I know it's a long shot, but would it be weird if I came to Halifax? Would you want to meet me if I got in?" I sat at my kitchen table holding those application papers, looking at the careful way Sip had filled out every section, the portfolio descriptions that revealed both talent and dedication. This child had been planning their future with the same methodical care I'd once used to plan Elric's education, but without any family support or encouragement. That evening I called Griffin. Our dinner dates had become a comfortable weekly routine, and he'd become the person I trusted most with my complicated feelings about this new family revelation. "What would you do?" I asked him as we walked along the winter beach, bundled in, coats and scarves. "If someone you loved was making a decision that could bring them closer to you, but going against their parents' wishes?" Griffin considered this carefully, as he did most questions. I think I'd ask myself whether I was more interested in what was convenient for the adults or what was best for the young person. Sipe is 16, almost 17, old enough to make some decisions independently, old enough to know their own mind about education, certainly. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the waves crash against the rocky shore. The winter ocean was dramatic in a way that suited my mood. Powerful, unpredictable, beautiful enough to take your breath away. "There's something else," I said finally. "Sipe doesn't know about my situation with Elric, about the phone calls he's been making, about his promise to visit for Christmas." Griffin stopped walking. "He hasn't visited yet. He called Christmas Eve to say he couldn't make it after all. Work emergency. He sent an expensive gift through overnight shipping instead. The gift had been a cashmere scarf in a color I never wore, clearly chosen by Jennifer or someone similar. I donated it to the church clothing drive, still in its box." "But you haven't told Sipe about any of this?" "How do I explain to a teenager that their father has been calling his own mother for months, trying to repair a relationship he'd already hidden them from? It's too complicated, and it's not their burden to carry." Griffin nodded slowly. "You're protecting them the way Elric thought he was protecting them." The observation stung because it was accurate. I was making decisions about what Sip should and shouldn't know, just as Elric had made decisions about whether they should know me. The difference was intent, but the result was the same: managing information to control outcomes. So what do? You trust them to handle the truth. You treat them like the almost adult they are instead of the child you want to protect. That night, I wrote a different kind of letter to Saipi. Instead of the careful, cheerful grandmother persona I'd been presenting, I wrote honestly about my relationship with their father, about the years of feeling ignored, about the phone calls that had come after I'd stopped reaching out. I want you to understand that my conflict with your father has nothing to do with you, I wrote. I'm angry with him for keeping you secret from me, but I'm not angry with you for existing. I would be honored to meet you if you come to Halifax, and I think you should apply to any school that excites you, regardless of what anyone else thinks is practical. I also want you to know that relationships are complicated, even between people who love each other. Your father and I are trying to figure out how to be in each other's lives again. But that process shouldn't stop you from making your own choices about who you want to know. I sealed the letter before I could second-guess myself, walking through the cold evening air to drop it in the post box downtown. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Elric's number. What did you say to Sipe? His voice was tight with anger. I told them the truth about our relationship. You had no right. I had every right. They're my grandchild, Elric. They asked me a direct question about family dynamics, and I answered honestly. They came home crying yesterday. They said they felt caught in the middle of something they didn't understand. The accusation hit its mark. I hadn't wanted to hurt Sipe, hadn't considered how learning about their fathers and my estrangement might affect them emotionally. What exactly did they say? They said they felt like they'd been lied to their whole life. By me for not telling them about you, and by you for pretending everything was fine between us. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. I'm sorry they're hurt, but they deserve to know why I haven't been part of their life. So you threw me under the bus to make yourself look better? I took responsibility for my part in our problems too. I told them I'd stopped trying to reach you, that I'd given up on our relationship. Great. So now they think both their father and their grandmother are failures at family. The conversation was spiraling toward cruelty, the way our interactions always seemed to lately. I took a breath and tried to find my way back to what mattered. Elric, Sipe is applying to art school in Halifax. I know. They asked me about it again last night. And I told them what I've always told them. Art school is expensive, impractical, and Halifax is too far away. What if it didn't have to be expensive? What do you mean? I'd been thinking about this since Sip's letter arrived, turning it over in my mind like a shell examined from all angles. I mean, what if they had a place to stay? What if I helped with expenses? The silence on the other end was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom, no. Why not? Because you're trying to buy your way into their life. I'm trying to support their education, the same way I supported yours. That's different. How? Because you're doing it to get back at me. The accusation was so far from my actual motivation that I almost laughed. I'm doing it because I have a grandchild who's talented and ambitious and deserves support. And because I have money sitting in accounts earning interest while Sipe works part-time jobs to save for their dreams. You don't even know them. Whose fault is that? Another long pause. When Elric spoke again, his voice had lost some of its defensive edge. If you do this, if you help them come to Halifax, it changes everything. Yes, I agreed. It does. I might lose them. And there it was, the fear that had driven 16 years of secrecy. Elric was afraid that if Sipe had other options, other sources of love and support, they might choose something other than the limited relationship he offered. Or you might discover that love isn't a zero-sum game, I said gently. You might find that Sipe having more people who care about them makes your relationship stronger, not weaker. And if I say no, if I forbid it, then you'll be making the same mistake you've been making their whole life, trying to control love instead of trusting it. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen watching the morning light play across the water. Whatever happened next, the careful balance we'd all been maintaining was about to shift dramatically. Sip would have to choose between their father's approval and their own dreams. Elric would have to choose between his fear and his love for his child. And I would have to choose between the comfortable life I'd been building in my solitude and the complicated, messy, beautiful possibility of being a grandmother to someone who needed me. For the first time in months, I felt ready for whatever came next. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday in March. I was in the garden cutting back winter-damaged rose canes in preparation for spring growth. When I heard the phone, ringing through the open kitchen window, I almost didn't answer. My hands were dirty, and I was finally making progress on a task I'd been avoiding for weeks. But something made me hurry inside, wiping my hands on my gardening apron as I reached for the receiver. Mrs. Westridge? The voice was young, nervous, familiar from my dreams. It's Sip Cypress, your grandchild. I sank into the nearest chair, my heart performing acrobatics. Sip, how wonderful to hear your voice. Are you calling from Mason's house? No, I'm actually calling from the Vancouver airport. The world seemed to tilt slightly off its axis. The airport? I got into NSCAT. Full scholarship plus a small living stipend. I just found out yesterday and Their voice broke slightly. I bought a ticket to Halifax. I land at 3:47 this afternoon. I looked at the kitchen clock. 11:15 a.m. My grandchild would be here in less than 5 hours. Does your father know? Long pause. He knows I got accepted. We had a fight about it last night. He said I was choosing you over him, that I was being manipulated by someone I barely know. My heart ached for this teenager caught between loyalty and possibility. And what did you say? I said I was choosing myself, my future, my art. Their voice grew stronger. I said I was tired of making decisions based on other people's fears. The pride I felt was so fierce it surprised me. This child had more courage at 17 than I'd had at 70. I don't have anywhere to stay yet, Sip continued. I have some money saved, enough for a few nights in a hotel while I figure things out. But I was wondering, I know this is sudden, but would you maybe want to have coffee or dinner? I've been wanting to meet you for so long. Cypress, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning in my chest. You're not staying in a hotel. You're staying here with me for as long as you want. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. You're not imposing your family. The sound that came through the phone might have been a sob or a laugh. Dad said you'd probably be polite, but not really want a teenager disrupting your life. Your father has been wrong about a lot of things where I'm concerned. 3 hours. Later, I stood in the Halifax airport arrivals area, holding a sign with Cypress Westridge written in my careful teacher's handwriting. My hands were shaking slightly, from nerves, excitement, and the overwhelming significance of this moment. The passengers from the Vancouver flight began emerging, and I found myself studying each young face, trying to imagine which one might be mine. Would they look like Elric? Like me? Like the other parent I'd never heard described? Then I saw them. A teenager with Elric's dark eyes but softer features, carrying a worn backpack and pulling a small suitcase, looking around the arrivals. Area with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They were wearing a paint-stained denim jacket over a black t-shirt, and their hair was cut in an asymmetrical style that somehow managed to look both artistic and practical. Our eyes met across the crowd, and I knew immediately. This was my grandchild, Xiao approached slowly, as if they weren't quite sure this was real. "Grandmother Imogene?" "Just Imogene is fine," I said, and then, because I couldn't help myself, "Or whatever feels comfortable to you." We stood there for a moment, 17 and 74, looking at each other across decades of missed opportunities. Then Sip stepped forward and hugged me, a tentative embrace that gradually became fierce. "You're real," they whispered against my shoulder. "So are you," I whispered back. The drive home took 40 minutes, filled with careful conversation as we learned each other's voices. Sipe told me about the flight, about leaving Vancouver without telling their father where they were, staying, about the art portfolio that had earned them admission to one of Canada's most competitive art programs. "I brought something for you," they said as we pulled into my driveway. "It's in my bag, the painting I told you about, of you and Dad when he was young." Inside my house, Sip stood in the living room looking around with curious eyes. "It smells like books and ocean air," they said. "And something else." "What is that?" "Probably the roses. I bring them inside in winter sometimes." They nodded, still taking in their surroundings. I realized I was seeing my home through their eyes. The comfortable furniture chosen for reading rather than impressing. The bookshelves that covered every available wall. The photographs of Elric at various ages that I'd never taken down despite everything. "He looks happy in these pictures," Sip observed, stopping in front of a photo of 8-year-old Elric on the beach, grinning and holding up a sand dollar. He was. We both were. "What happened?" The question was direct in the way only teenagers can manage. I considered offering a simplified version, but Griffin's words echoed in my mind. "Trust them to handle the truth. Your father's father died when Elric was 9. It changed him, made him afraid of losing people. I think he learned to keep everyone at a distance to protect himself from that kind of pain again. Including me. Especially you. Because losing you would hurt the most." Sip nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something they'd already suspected. "It's lonely, being loved from a distance." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." They pulled a flat package from their backpack, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "This is for you." I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a canvas about the size of a book. The painting showed 2 figures on a beach, a young woman in a yellow dress and a boy about Sip's current age. But it wasn't a literal reproduction of the photograph they'd described. Instead, it was impressionistic, capturing the feeling of that moment rather than its exact details. The woman's face was turned toward the boy with an expression of such love and pride that it took my breath away. "You painted us as we were," I said softly. "I painted you as you still are. At least, that's how I imagined you when I was growing up, wondering about my grandmother." I hung the painting on the mantel, next to the teaching award I'd almost forgotten about. It looked right there, adding color and life to a space that had grown too careful over the years. That evening, we cooked dinner together. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. But the kitchen felt different with another person moving through it. Sipe chopped vegetables with the focused attention they probably brought to their artwork. And we talked about books, about art school, about the strange courage it had taken for them to board that plane. "Are you worried about your father?" I asked as we sat down to eat. "Yeah," they admitted. "But I'm more worried about what happens if I keep making my life smaller to accommodate his fears." The wisdom in that statement caught me off guard. This 17-year-old had learned something it had taken me 74 years to understand. "Have you told him where you are?" I texted him that I landed safely and that I'm staying somewhere safe. "I'll call him tomorrow." They paused, pushing pasta around on their plate. "I keep hoping he'll surprise me, that he'll call and say he's proud of me for getting the scholarship or that he's excited about my future. And if he doesn't, then I'll be sad, but I won't change my mind. I can't build my life around someone else's inability to be proud of me." After dinner, we sat in the living room with tea, and Sipe showed me photos on their phone, their artwork, their friends, their life in Vancouver. I found myself studying their face as they talked, looking for traces of the family I recognized mixed with features that were entirely their own. "Can I ask you something?" they said as we were preparing for bed. I'd made up the guest room with fresh linens and put a small vase of early daffodils on the nightstand. "Of course. Do you think Dad will ever forgive me for choosing this?" Considered the question carefully. "I think your father loves you more than he knows how to show. And I think watching you succeed in something you're passionate about might teach him that love doesn't have to be afraid all the time. And if it doesn't, then you'll still have chosen yourself, which is never the wrong choice." That night, I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of another person in my house. Footsteps in the hallway, water running in the bathroom, the soft creak of floorboards as Sipe settled into sleep. For the first time in years, my house felt complete. But I also thought about Elric, alone in his Vancouver apartment, wondering if he'd lost his child by trying too hard to keep them safe. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and difficult conversations. There would be anger and accusations, fear disguised as disappointment. But tonight my grandchild was sleeping in the room down the hall, and I was finally, fully, completely a grandmother. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my back porch, watching Sipe work in the garden they've planted along the eastern edge of my property. It's September now, and they're preparing for their second year at NSCAD. The summer has transformed both my house and my life in ways I couldn't have imagined that March afternoon when I picked them up at the airport. The garden was Sipe's idea. A mixture of vegetables and flowers arranged in patterns that are part practical, part artistic installation. "Everything grows better in community," they said when they proposed it. And I've come to understand they weren't just talking about plants. They're kneeling among the tomato plants now, harvesting the late-season fruit with the same focused attention they bring to their paintings. Their hair has grown longer over the summer, and the paint-stained clothes have become a permanent uniform. I've learned to keep old towels by the washing machine and to buy the industrial-strength stain remover. The first month was an adjustment, for both of us. I'd forgotten how much space a teenager occupies, not just physically, but emotionally and energetically. Sipe filled my quiet house with music, friends, late-night phone calls, and the controlled chaos of art projects. They transformed the spare bedroom into a studio, covering the walls with sketches and works in progress. But they also brought laughter back into my daily routine, introduced me to their friends who treated me like a favorite aunt rather than an elderly stranger, and helped me see my familiar surroundings through eyes that found beauty in unexpected places. The phone calls with Elric began a week after Sipe arrived, and continued sporadically through the spring. They were difficult conversations, full of accusations and hurt feelings and long silences. He was angry with me for enabling what he saw as Sipe's rebellion, angry with Sipe for choosing art school over practical considerations, angry with himself for feeling like he'd lost control of a situation he'd never really controlled in the first place. "You're turning them against me," he said during one particularly painful call in April. "I'm not turning them toward anything except their own future," I replied. "And if that feels like a betrayal to you, maybe you should examine what kind of loyalty you've been expecting." But gradually something shifted. Maybe it was seeing Sipe's joy in their studies, or maybe it was the simple passage of time wearing down his resistance. The conversations became less frequent but more genuine. He started asking about Sipe's classes, their friends, their artwork, small questions, but genuine ones. The breakthrough came in June, when Sipe's first-year portfolio was selected for display in a student exhibition. They called their father to share the news, and for the first time since they'd arrived in Halifax, I heard them crying after one of their conversations with him. "Happy tears or sad tears?" I asked when they emerged from their room. "Both," they said. "He said he was proud of me, and then he asked if he could see the exhibition photos when they're posted online." In July, Elric called me directly, not to argue or accuse, but to ask about logistics for visiting in August. "You want to come here?" I asked, surprised. "I want to see Sipe's work, and I want to see where they're living." A pause. "And I want to see you." The visit was awkward at first. Elric arrived tense and defensive, clearly expecting to find evidence that I'd been poisoning his child against him. Instead, he found Sip blooming in an environment that supported their interests and ambitions, living with a grandmother who asked about their day and cooked their favorite foods and treated their art like the serious pursuit it was. He stayed for 4 days, sleeping in the guest room while Sipe moved back to their studio. I watched him slowly relax as he realized that my relationship with Sipe didn't diminish their love for him, and that supporting their education wasn't the same as stealing their loyalty. On his last evening, we sat on this same porch, after Sip had gone to bed, drinking wine and listening to the waves. "I was afraid," he said suddenly. "I know. Not just of losing them. I was afraid they'd choose you because you were more available, more present." "Being present isn't a competition. Elric, it's a choice." He nodded slowly. "I've been making the wrong choices for a long time." "Not wrong. Just afraid." "Same thing, maybe." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I realized this was the most honest conversation we'd had since he was a child. "I don't know how to undo 16 years of keeping them at arm's length," he said finally. "You don't undo it. You start from where you are now." Before he left, he asked if he could take some of Sipe's artwork back to Vancouver to frame for his apartment. "I want people to know I have an artist for a child," he said, and Sip's smile was radiant. Now, as I watch them work in the garden, I think about the long journey we've all taken to get to this ordinary September afternoon. It's not perfect. Elric still struggles with expressing emotions. Sip still worries about disappointing him, and I still sometimes catch myself being more careful than I need to be. But it's real. We're finally having real relationships with each other, instead of the carefully managed interactions we'd settled for before. Sip looks up from the tomatoes and waves, their hands stained with earth and chlorophyll. "Almost finished. Then I want to show you the new painting I'm working on." "The one for your advanced color theory class?" "No, a different one. It's a surprise. They've been working on this mystery project for weeks, disappearing into their studio after dinner and emerging hours later with paint in their hair and a secretive smile. Griffin arrives just as Sipe is washing their hands at the outdoor spigot. He's become a regular fixture at our dinner table, bringing books and conversation and the quiet companionship of someone who understands that love doesn't always have to be dramatic to be meaningful. "How's the harvest?" he asks Sip, admiring the basket of vegetables they've collected. "Abundant," Sip replies. "Grandmother says it's because I talk to the plants while I'm working. Do you?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think out loud about color combinations and composition. But plants are good listeners. Over dinner, Sipe's harvest vegetables prepared 3 different ways. We talk about the upcoming school year, about the art history class Sipe is most excited about Griffin's plan to expand the bookstore's poetry section. It strikes me that this is what I'd been missing all those years when I was focused on the relationship I wasn't having with Elric. The simple pleasure of daily life shared with people who choose to be present for it. After dinner, Sipe announces it's time for the surprise. They disappear into their studio and return carrying a canvas covered with a paint-splattered sheet. "This is for you," they say, setting it on the easel Griffin helped them build on the porch. For everything, they pull away the sheet, revealing a painting that makes me gasp. It's this house, my house, but seen through their eyes. The blue siding is rendered in a dozen different shades, catching light and shadow in ways that make it seem to glow. The garden is a riot of color that somehow feels both wild and carefully composed. And there, in the kitchen window, is a figure that's unmistakably me, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking out at the morning with an expression of contentment. But it's not just a portrait of the house. It's a portrait of home, as Sip has experienced it here. Warm, welcoming, alive with possibility. The light in the kitchen window, I say, my voice catching. "That's how you see this place?" "That's how you've made this place," they correct. "For me, but also for yourself. When I first got here, you were living like you were waiting for your real life to begin. Now you're just living. They're right." Somewhere over these past months, I stopped waiting for external validation to feel complete. I started choosing my own life instead of reacting to other people's choices about me. That night, after Griffin has gone home and Sipe has disappeared into their studio to work on an assignment, I call Elric. We talk most Sunday evenings now, conversations that are still sometimes stilted but increasingly genuine. "Sipe painted me a picture of the house," I tell him. "Are you in it?" "In the kitchen window, having my morning coffee." "That sounds right," he says. "That's how I remember you, actually. Always in the kitchen, always making everything better just by being there." It's the most sentimental thing he's said to me in years, and I feel tears prick my eyes. "I'm planning to come for Thanksgiving," he continues. "If that's okay with you. I thought maybe I could bring someone. There's a woman I've been seeing, and she'd like to meet Saipeu and you." "I'd like that very much. Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher, actually. Elementary school. She thinks it's amazing that I have a mother who raised an artist and a son who became an entrepreneur." She sounds wise. She is. She's also the one who told me I needed to stop being afraid of my own family. After we hang up, I sit on my porch, listening to the September waves and thinking about the strange ways life can surprise you. A year ago, I was preparing for another lonely winter, resigned to a relationship with my son that felt more like a polite acquaintance than genuine connection. Now I'm planning a Thanksgiving dinner for 5, looking forward to meeting the woman who's helped Elric find his way back to emotional availability, anticipating another year of watching Sipe grow into the artist and person they're becoming. The phone rings again, and I answer expecting it to be Griffin or Adele. "Grandmother? It's Sip, calling from their studio upstairs. I was wondering if you wanted to come up here. I want to show you what I'm working on next. I'll be right there." I climb the stairs to what used to be my spare bedroom, and is now a space alive with color and creativity. Sipe has sketches pinned to every available surface, works in progress propped against the walls, brushes soaking in jars of cloudy water. "I'm planning a series," they say, gesturing to a collection of small canvases. "About family. Not traditional families, but chosen families. People who find each other and decide to build something together." They show me studies of different groupings, elderly friends sharing coffee, teenagers who've found community in art class, neighbors who've become surrogate family for each other. "This one is my favorite so far," they say, pointing to a canvas that shows 3 figures on a beach, an older woman, a teenager, and a man in his 40s, all looking in slightly different directions, but standing close enough to be connected. Is that us? It's who we're becoming. I study the painting, noting how Sip has captured something in the body language of all 3 figures that suggest both independence and belonging. We're not clinging to each other, but we're choosing to occupy the same space. "Your father will like this," I say. "I hope so. I want him to understand that loving you doesn't mean I love him less, that having you in my life makes me more myself, not less his child. He's starting to understand that." "Good," Sip says, adding a small stroke of blue to the ocean in the background. "Because I'm planning to keep you both." Later, after Sipe has gone to bed, I sit in my kitchen with a cup of tea and look out at the moonlit garden they've created. Tomorrow I'll help them prepare for the new school year, listen to their excitement about advanced painting techniques and art history seminars. Next month, Elric will visit with Sarah, and I'll get to see him through the eyes of someone who brings out his capacity for warmth. But tonight I'm simply here in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I've chosen and the family that chose me back. Sipe was right about the light in this window. It's not just the physical illumination, but the sense of purpose and belonging that comes from finally, fully being present in your own life. At 74, I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to choose love over fear, to build the family you want instead of settling for the family you think you deserve. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that family finds you right back. The snow had begun to melt by the time March rolled in, and with it came the muddy awakening of spring. In most years, I would have marked the new season with a fresh calendar, perhaps new, rose cuttings or a trip to Halifax for fresh baking supplies. But this year, everything felt different. Not in the loud, cinematic way people expect change to come, but in the quiet, soul-deep transformation that arrives only when you've let go of something you never thought you could live without. Japai had been with me for just over a week when the rhythm of our house began to shift. The early mornings that had once belonged solely to me, coffee in hand, staring out over the Atlantic, now came with another pair of footsteps padding into the kitchen, usually accompanied by a paint-streaked hoodie and an excited recounting of some dream or art school idea. At first, I worried that the noise would unsettle my carefully ordered solitude, but I hadn't realized how starved I had become for laughter in the early light. That Tuesday, I found a note on the fridge, written in purple marker on the back of a grocery receipt. Gone sketching the shoreline. Don't worry. I brought the big coat and your old boots. Found some driftwood yesterday I want to draw before it gets carried away. Beneath it was a small doodle of a seagull wearing sunglasses. I chuckled to myself and folded the note, placing it in the old biscuit tin I'd begun using to save sipes, drawings and letters. A new kind of family heirloom. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines lining the coast, Sip returned with wind-blown hair and the kind of grin I hadn't seen on Elric since he was 12, and caught his first trout. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, and they carried a sketchbook filled with quick, expressive drawings of gulls, twisted driftwood, and an old rowboat nearly swallowed by dune grass. I found a shape in the clouds that looked like a bear. "Sitting in a teacup," they said, pouring themselves a cup of tea from the kettle I'd left warm. "I think I'll paint it." I smiled. "Make sure you sign it. That one sounds like it belongs in a gallery." "Or a children's book," they said brightly. There was something remarkable, even sacred, about witnessing this unfurling. Here was a child raised with silence, who spoke in color. A teenager who had never known me, yet trusted me with their most vulnerable imaginings. And in the quiet hours we shared over late-night cocoa, or while cooking supper, I came to understand a simple truth: I had not lost a son. I had found someone new to love, someone who saw me not as a symbol of disappointment or obligation, but simply as a person worth knowing. And that changed everything. By the time the daffodils in Sip's garden had bloomed in their full buttery splendor, I'd begun to see time in new shapes. My life, once defined by Elric's absence and the long ache of waiting, was now punctuated by laughter through the floorboards, the scent of linseed oil and turpentine drifting through the house, and the thump of music vibrating faintly from upstairs as Sip painted until midnight. Our rhythms braided together with surprising ease. I had not expected this. Not just their presence in the house, but how effortlessly they stitched themselves into its fabric. A few weeks after they arrived, they painted the old back steps in mismatched stripes of turquoise and soft lavender. I should have been scandalized by the lack of primer or the chaos of it all. But instead I found myself standing outside in my slippers, smiling down at the wild color like a secret left out for the world to find. We were no longer just housemates, separated by age and story. We had become something like co-conspirators. I was learning how to be a grandmother in real time, and Sipe, in their own quiet way, was teaching me how to live without apology. In mid-April, the acceptance letter arrived. A thick envelope from NSCAD, complete with scholarship confirmation, course placement, and a note of congratulations from the department chair. Sipe came bursting into the kitchen, eyes wide with disbelief. "I got in?" they said, voice trembling. "Not just in, full scholarship. They even want me to start in the summer session if I want." I dropped the dishcloth in my hands and opened my arms, and they stepped into my embrace like they'd been doing it for years. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. We stood like that for a long time, a tangle of relief, joy, and wonder. Later that night, as we celebrated with apple pie and ice cream, Sip looked across the table and said, "I want to stay here, with you, even once classes begin, if you'll have me." I blinked. "You want to live here long-term?" "I mean, I'll still be on campus most days, but it's the only place that's ever felt like home. I feel safe here." I nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it official. We'll rearrange the spare room, give you more studio space." "You're okay with all this?" "I'm better than okay. I was beginning to think this old house was just a museum to who I used to be. But now, it's full of life again. And that's because of you, Sipe smiled. Then it's settled. I'll paint the studio door yellow, something bright. But of course, nothing remains untouched forever. The next tremor came, as these things often do, on an ordinary Tuesday. I had just returned from town, with fresh bread and a stack of library books when I saw the red rental car in the driveway. At first, I thought perhaps Griffin had come by. He often dropped off used poetry collections for me to leaf through. But then I noticed the suitcase beside the porch, and a familiar tall figure pacing by the rose bushes I'd just begun to prune last week. Elric. My son stood awkwardly, his hands shoved into the pockets of his expensive wool coat, staring down at the gravel, like it might rearrange itself into an escape route. For a moment I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel as my pulse thundered in my ears. Then I stepped out and walked up the path, toward the son I hadn't seen in over 4 years. He looked older, not in the obvious ways, but in the set of his shoulders. The tired slump of a man too practiced in carrying guilt. His hair was peppered with silver, and his eyes, once so quick to shine, were dimmed by something heavier than time. "Mom," he said. "Elric, I didn't call, I had some time off and you're here," I said gently. "That's what matters." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I wasn't sure I should come. I thought maybe you'd slam the door in my face." I smiled sadly. "You're lucky your child got here first. They softened me up." He laughed, startled, and the sound was raw, almost boyish. "Can we talk?" "Let's go inside. The tea kettle's already warm." Sipe was at school when Elric arrived, and I was grateful for that. Not because I wanted to keep them apart, but because I needed to gather my own footing first. He followed me into the kitchen like a stranger visiting the house of his childhood. Cautious, reverent, almost fearful of being seen. His gaze darted over the photos still hanging in the hallway, over the new painting by Sipe on the mantel, and finally landed on the mug I'd set out for him. The one he'd made in 7th grade pottery class, still chipped at the rim. We sat across from each other, the silence between us elastic, stretching wide. "You've redecorated," he said eventually. "Sip did. They needed color. I didn't realize how gray everything had become until they arrived." He nodded. "They told me they were living here." I didn't know what to say. "You could have said thank you. Or maybe, I'm glad they're safe." He winced. "I know. I've made a mess of things." I sipped my tea. "You lied to me for 16 years, Elric. That wasn't a mess. That was a deliberate erasure." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry." He looked down at his hands. When Cypress was born, everything was chaos. Their mother didn't want a child. I fought for custody, took time off work, and then buried myself in building something to give them stability. But I didn't know how to be both a father and a son. I didn't trust myself to maintain both relationships. So I chose the one I thought I could control. "You chose control over connection," I said. "And it cost you." He nodded, eyes wet. "Sipe said you didn't hesitate when they asked to stay. That you opened the door like you'd been waiting for them." I didn't hesitate because I've spent 7 years learning what it feels like to be forgotten. I wasn't going to let your child feel that too. We sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the old kitchen clock and the occasional call of gulls overhead. "I want to be better," Elric said finally, "but I don't know how." "You start by showing up, and then you stay. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid I'd let them down. Afraid I'd let you down again. Here's the thing about family, I said softly. If you show up and tell the truth, there's room for mending. Maybe not always reconciliation, but mending, yes. Just then, the front door creaked open, and Sipe's voice floated through the hallway. Imogene, you home? I stood and gave Elric a look. Are you ready? He exhaled slowly. I think so. Then come meet your child. Again, the kitchen was filled with an aching stillness when Cypress stepped through the door and saw their father. They froze, just long enough for the air to thicken. Dad? Elric stood slowly from his chair. Hey, Sipe. I held my breath, watching the seconds stretch like a pulled thread. Sip set their backpack down carefully, as though testing gravity. Then their voice, cool and flat. You're here? I am. Why? A pause. I wanted to see you. Talk. In person. And your grandmother. Sip's expression flickered. I couldn't read it fully. Surprise, betrayal, hope. Maybe all of it. You could have done that years ago. I know, Elric said. But I didn't. Sip crossed their arms. You were okay with me being invisible to her, remember? But now you want to talk? Elric nodded, swallowing. I want to try. The three of us stood there, the distance between us crammed with unsaid things. Sipe's hands curled into fists. You don't get to just show up because you feel guilty. That's not how it works. I'm not asking to be forgiven, Elric said, voice trembling. I'm asking to be known. The silence that followed was electric. No one moved. Then finally, Sip gave the smallest nod. Dinner first, they muttered, turning toward the hallway. We can talk after. And just like that, a door, cracked, not flung open, began to shift. That night, over plates of roast vegetables and rosemary chicken, the tension eased by small degrees. It started with conversation about Sipe's classes. I watched as they lit up while describing a project in abstraction, fingers fluttering like birds. Elric watched too, quiet but captivated. Your work's incredible, he said at one point. I saw the gallery's online showcase. You've got range. Sip raised an eyebrow. You looked? I look all the time, Elric admitted. I just never reached out. Why not? Because I didn't know if I was allowed. Sip's fork paused halfway to their mouth. You were always allowed, Dad. You just didn't want to risk rejection. He nodded. You're right. After dinner, the two of them sat on the porch while I cleared the dishes. I watched them through the window. Two silhouettes against the dusk. The start of something fragile but real. Later, Sipe told me. He didn't ask to come back. He asked to start from where we are. I think that matters. I nodded. That's all we can ever do. Start where we are. The next few weeks unfolded in slow, deliberate stitches. Elric stayed in the spare room for 3 nights, long enough to have real conversations, but not long enough to overstay. He offered to help around the house, and when he fixed the jammed window in the upstairs bathroom, I saw a glimpse of the boy who used to take things apart, just to see how they worked. I still can't believe you kept that mug, he said one morning, nodding to the chipped cup on the counter. I smiled. I drink from it every morning. It's sturdy. You were always like that, he said softly. Sturdy. I turned toward him. I was lonely too. He nodded. I know now. I'm sorry I made you feel like an obligation. You made me feel erased." He winced. "But," I continued, "you also gave me Sepe, whether you meant to or not." A pause. "They're amazing, aren't they?" "They are. And they need you. Not in pieces. Fully. Honestly. I want to be that." "Then be it," I said. "No one's stopping you but you." SIP's summer session began in June. Their days became a blur of campus workshops, independent studio time, and late-night ramen slurped in the kitchen while they described critiques and color theory like gospel. "Professor Elman says I might be good enough to submit to a gallery in the fall," they told me one night. "Can you believe that?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I've believed that from the first time you showed me a seagull in sunglasses." Sipe laughed so hard they nearly dropped their spoon. Life with them became textured in new ways. They began bringing home classmates, a rotating chorus of poets, dancers, and painters who filled the house with warmth and youth. Our home became a landing place for misfits and dreamers, and I loved every chaotic second of it. One Friday, I came home from town to find them all in the backyard, painting a massive mural on an old canvas top Sipe had found in the shed. "What's this?" "Community experiment," Sip called. "Everyone paints one emotion. No names. Just color and shape." A girl with glitter on her cheeks chimed in. "It's an emotional topography." I laughed. "Just don't spill acrylic on my rose bushes." I brought out lemonade and cookies and sat on the porch, watching the art unfold in real time. And I realized that this beautiful mess of colors and voices was more healing than any quiet I had ever curated. Elric began calling once a week, sometimes to me, sometimes to Sep. His tone grew easier. We stopped tiptoeing around the past and started speaking in full truths. "I saw a therapist," he told me one night. For the first time. I told her about my dad's accident, about you, about how terrified I was that if I let anyone in, they'd vanish. And she said love is risk, and silence is safer, but it doesn't save you. I nodded. She sounds wise. She also said I owe you the truth. "Then say it." He hesitated. "I didn't tell you about Sipe because I thought you'd be disappointed in me." "That I'd judge you for having a child? For failing as a parent? For being afraid?" I walked to the window and stared at the ocean. "You were wrong, Elric. I would have done anything to support you. All I ever wanted was to be invited in." I know that now. I turned to him. "Then do something different with that knowing." "I am," he said. "And I want to keep doing better for Sipilas for you." In July, we held a small summer exhibition in the garden. Sipe and their classmates arranged their work along strings of twinkling lights and hung canvas sheets between trees, like sails. Griffin donated wine from his cellar. Adele brought 2 pies. The whole town came. Elric flew in for the weekend. Maun stood beside Sipe while they presented their work. Abstract portraits, each based on a person in their life. One painted in thick blue strokes was titled Inheritance. "Is this me?" Elric asked. "It's us," Sip said. "Past and present. The things we pass down. The silence, the guilt. And this second chance." He didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, "It's beautiful." Later that night, he stood beside me under the stars. "I've missed years I can't get back." "You still have years ahead," I said. "I want to be part of this. The way you are. Then stay part of it. I mean it. I want to move here." I turned to him in surprise. "Seriously? I can work remotely now, And Sipe wants roots here. I do too. I took a deep breath. Then let's start over. All of us. Together. The house changed again that fall. Elric rented the old cottage down the road and began visiting daily. He and Sipe worked on a joint project for a digital gallery. Elric coding the website, Sipe designing the visuals. Their collaboration became its own form of therapy. Griffin helped me turn the garage into a small workshop, a hybrid art and writing studio for both Sipe and me. He called it the Westridge Studio, though I protested the name. "You're the matriarch," he said. "Let them all know." Adele started a writing circle again. We met on Thursdays and read each other our truths. My story about Sip, about being found when I thought I'd been discarded, made half the room cry. "You waited," one woman said. "And the waiting saved you." "No," I replied. "The choosing did." On my 75th birthday, the house was packed with friends, family, and people I never expected to see in my home again. Elric cooked dinner, the first time I'd ever seen him in an apron. Sipe made a handmade birthday card with a portrait of me in the garden. My hands buried in dirt and roses. The card read, "You grew me, even from afar. Thank you for being my beginning. Love." "Sip," I cried. Elric hugged me and whispered, "I won't forget this one." "You better not," I teased. He held on longer than usual. "Thank you for not giving up on us." I looked around the room, at the laughter, the warmth, the life I never thought I'd reclaim. "I didn't give up," I said. "I just stopped waiting and started living." Winter came quietly that year, but this time it didn't feel lonely. Sipe stayed in Halifax during the week but returned on weekends. Elric came for dinners, movie nights, long walks by the coast. One evening, as we watched the snow drift outside, Sipe said, "It's strange, isn't it?" "What is?" "How sometimes the people who hurt you the most are also the ones who teach you what healing looks like." I nodded. "It's all part of the same story." "Even the broken parts? Especially the broken parts." Sip smiled, eyes gleaming. "Then I think this is a really beautiful story." I reached for their hand. "It is, and it's just getting started. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting. For you, just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.